One of the 23 Februaries that I have known my husband. He's greeted the month by declaring it the most useless month of the year. Of course, if you have a birthday, and happy birthday, Bill, the month is extremely useful, and we are grateful that it happened. But if it were up to my husband, we'd skip it altogether. If you think about it, it can be a bit dreary. We're over the novelty of winter. The snow is just piled up in mountains in the Meijer parking lot. Not much fun there. And the earth seems to be this half-frozen, half-muddy mess. There's not much that seems to change, and it doesn't seem like there are many signs of hope. And it blurs together, and we basically hope it passes rather quickly, which fortunately it has fewer days than the rest of the months of the year, so it does actually pass a little bit faster. And we hope that we can quickly get on to the business of spring. But if you think about it, we need February, and not just because of the birthdays. We need time to notice that we're ready for change and to anticipate the future. You might say that we're spending this time in the beautiful not yet. Well, Carrie Newcomer's lovely poem that we heard a few minutes ago is speaking specifically to the coming spring, and even this February day that we're finding ourselves in. There's a broader way to interpret her words, and it applies to the bigger picture of our lives, and that's where I want to go this morning. I want to start by illustrating this broader interpretation by taking us back in time to something that we all experienced, but perhaps aren't able to see or weren't able to see it as the beautiful not yet. We're going to go back for a moment to November 8th and 9th of 2016. And I'm going to share my personal experience of those days, understanding and recognizing that it might not be everyone's experience. Some people might have felt the opposite of what I felt, and yet all of us found our world changed in really profound ways. So waking up on the morning of November 8th, 2016, I felt optimistic. I thought, today is the day that we elect our first woman president. Like some of you might have done, we invited friends over in anticipation of some celebration as the election returns came in. And as the polls closed, and I was on the West Coast, so polls were closing over here and we were still open. But as the polls were closing, my husband turns to me and he says, you know, it looks like Trump is kind of winning more than we thought he would. And I said, oh, don't worry about that. You know, there's still lots of returns yet. It always looks this way. It always looks this way beforehand. So we just have to give it some time, don't worry. As we know, as the evening wore on, our hopes began to dim. My friends ended up going home a little earlier than we thought. I went to bed at about 10 o'clock, and I was pretty drained of my optimism. But I still had, this little shred, this little sliver of hope that when I woke up the next morning, that the world would have been returned to its rightful order. As we know, we woke up on November 9th, 2016, and I, for one, found myself in the upside down. What I thought I knew was no more, and I had no idea what was going to be coming next. I've come to see that period, those days, those weeks in different ways. One lens to see it through is the 7 stages of grief. Those of us who are ready to celebrate proceeded in record speed through the first 4 stages. We went through shock and disbelief, denial, pain and guilt, anger and bargaining. And we finally landed for an extended period of time, and some might still say we're in this period of time, of depression, reflection, and loneliness. But there's another way of looking at that period that I've also been sitting with recently. We can see what we went through, and maybe what we're still going through, as liminal time. I first heard the word liminal about 2 years, actually exactly 2 years ago today, at the Search for Meaning Festival in Seattle. One of the first morning sessions was given by Rabbi Cher Hirsch, who led a large congregation in Los Angeles, and she has this awesomely titled book, We Plan, God Laughs. And she was the first speaker that I attended that morning. And she was going to talk about liminal spaces. And she started her explanation of what liminal means by having us do a visualization exercise that I'm going to ask you to do with me right now. So get comfortable and close your eyes. And imagine that you're arriving at your home. You're walking through the door after a long day. and you're looking forward to spending time in your favorite space in your home. It's the space in your home that feels comfortable and safe, and it's where you feel like you can be most yourself. You can relax. Spend a moment just in that space. Now go ahead and open up your eyes, and I'm curious if a couple people would be willing to share. What space did you go to in your home? The couch. Also my favorite space. Where else? Any other spaces that came up? Yeah. You have a what? Your meditation chair. Yeah. What else? A jigsaw puzzle. Great. What else? A hammock outside. Beautiful. Anyone else? Yeah. The obligatory belly rubs of the dog as soon as you walk in the door. His living room facing the wetlands. Well, notice that no one, thank you first for sharing, and notice that no one said the hallway. Now, Rabbi Hirsch pointed out that we tend to go to rooms and that no one chooses the hallway when she talks about this exercise. Because notice I said space, I didn't say room. So you could have chosen it. A hallway is a transition space. It's in between the rooms. And usually we're kind of rushing through them, or we see them as a way to get from point A to point B, but we don't think that much about them. And think about houses or apartments that don't even have hallways. It's just room connected to room. So there are no transition spaces. And I've even heard that hallways are considered wasted space in a home. But we need the hallways just like we need February. We need the transitions. They are the liminal space that connects the rooms of our lives. To be in a liminal space means that the world as we know it, our routines, our rituals, our context, and even our identity, all of those things are over. And the world as it's going to be is yet to be revealed. For me, this describes the days and weeks around the 2016 election. Even those who won that night experienced a shift in identity, from unrepresented underdog to unprecedented power. The world as they knew it had changed. And I hadn't thought about that time necessarily or put the word liminal to it until recently when I heard Michael Meade on the Living Myth podcast explain it this way, and I'm going to paraphrase. He says, "The liminal time is where endings and beginnings exchange rapidly, and nothing seems clear or certain or fixed in any way. It means to be in between one thing and another as if on a threshold." And the word liminal means threshold. We're also living in an initiatory time, where it's easy to feel disoriented unless we understand that it's in the disorientation that we can find the way our souls intend to be oriented in the world. Another way of explaining liminality comes from Wikipedia, which offers that during liminal times of all kinds, social hierarchies may be reversed or temporarily dissolved, continuity of tradition may become uncertain, and future outcomes once taken for granted can be thrown into doubt. Does that sound familiar to anyone? And it's no wonder that we want to rush through these times. We ask ourselves, how fast can I get through this? Because that liminal space is uncomfortable, it's uncertain and unsettled. We feel restless and we really are ready to get on to the next thing. It brings to mind the immediate calls for impeachment hearings before the current president was even sworn in. I think that was in part because we were desperate to speed through that uncertainty, and we just wanted to get back to a place that was comfortable and somewhat more predictable. But think what would have happened if we had done that, if we had rushed through it. It's highly likely that we wouldn't have felt the urgency that we have to have the conversations around race, gender, globalization, nationalism, sexual harassment, immigration, economic inequality, and at the end of the day, all of those things tell us about what kind of country we want to be. And think of the millions of people, especially the women, who stepped up and became more politically active. But I don't want to make this all about politics. It's kind of an obvious parallel, but I share that as evidence of the power of what Michael Meade might have meant when he said, it's in that disorientation that we find the way our souls intend to be oriented in the world. And I believe that thousands, if not millions, found their personal orientation in our societal disorientation. If we define the liminal space as the threshold between the familiar old and the uncertain new, we're going to take some time here to explore what it means to be in that liminal space and to see it as an invitation that we gladly accept, or at least can make some peace with. There are liminal spaces we choose and others that we don't. The ones we choose can leave us feeling like we're in a suspended state, in kind of a limbo. We might be intentionally switching jobs. We might be moving, as Kevin described, moving across the country from California to Michigan. We might be getting engaged or having or adopting a child. I learned in the morning session, something I hadn't thought of, we could also be choosing to be in that space because of some hallucinogenic drugs. And I'm not going to name names. All of these events include a time when the old way of being falls away and the new is still yet unknown. There are also liminal spaces that we don't choose and that we have no control over. It might be after we have received a medical diagnosis or someone dies unexpectedly. Barb shared the story of a fire in her house. That was definitely a transitional liminal time that she did not choose. And there's also the threshold between seasons, where we're standing right now, when we have no idea what to wear, and we don't know if we need to take sunglasses, a rain parka, or snow boots with us. The liminal time can also feel like a plateau, and this is actually how I first started thinking of it. We might use words like flat, or spinning my wheels, or stuck to describe those times. And as a professional coach, I've heard countless clients come to me, and one of the first things they'll say is, "I'm stuck." They've lost their momentum, they've somehow lost their way, what's worked before isn't working anymore, and they feel like it's time for something new, but they don't know what that is. They want off the plateau, and they want off it now. And my agenda this morning is to persuade you that the plateau, that liminal space, is actually the beautiful not yet. I want us to reframe it so that it's less about feeling stuck and uncomfortable, and it becomes a more creative and generative space. It's a chance to be fully present to the beautiful not yet and to wallow, as Carrie said, in the muddy possibility. So we're going to look at how to transform that space from one of stuckness to possibility by using 3 questions. How can we recognize the liminal spaces when they're happening? What does it mean to make peace with them? And what can we do to make those liminal periods more life-giving as opposed to life-draining? First, how do we recognize them? I've already started to give you some clues, but I'm just going to sum it up. You feel a disturbance in the force. Your routine and your rituals and your sense of order are disrupted. If you choose to be there, you might feel excitement and anticipation. If you don't choose to be there, you probably are going to feel fear and some dread. I remember my first conscious awareness of being in that kind of space, even though I didn't have the word liminal for it yet. And this was when I was in graduate school. We were close to finals, and the next step for me was an internship. And after that, I had no idea. And I remember driving away from classes, to go home, and realizing for the first time, oh my gosh, when I leave campus for the last time, this is the first time that my life was not going to be predetermined by some other structure. It wasn't going to be about semesters or quarters or finals or vacation times that were dictated by somebody else. It just stretched out before me, unstructured and unknown. I was excited, but I also got a little bit freaked out. My identity was going to change, and I didn't know how. And that is the essence of a liminal space. You can think of it as a hallway, a waiting room, a plateau, whatever metaphor that you want that conjures up that sensation of being in, leaving behind one reality and moving to one that you don't know about yet. You feel like the ground has shifted under your feet, and you lose touch with terra. So what does it mean to make peace with that shifting and that uncertainty? It means that we recognize it and we reframe it into a more productive, beautiful, not yet space. We see it as a resting spot, a place to catch our breath. And I love Wayne brought up in our pre-conversation about how one of the ways we reorient ourselves is by returning to breath. And it's during that kind of plateau space that we can find grounding in the breath. We have to let go of resisting that space or trying to rush through it, and we accept it. And we accept that the only way out is through. And this is not about being passive or giving in completely to the impulse, which I have had, of just curling up in the fetal position and throwing my favorite blankie over my head and saying, "Wake me up when it's over. I only want to come out then." It's an invitation to engage in active and alert rest, a level of mindfulness that finds us awake and observing, non-judgmental, and synthesizing the past, present, and future. It gives us a chance to connect the dots that we have been so busy rushing through. To make peace can also mean to choose the moment, as Eckhart Tolle suggests in The Power of Now. He writes, "Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you have chosen it." I share that knowing that I don't believe that applies to everything. I don't think Barb chose to have her house burned down. I don't believe we choose the traumatic or horrible things that might happen to us. I think that's a dangerous rabbit hole to go down. That said, I do like that concept, and I've shared it with many clients, that when we're in that liminal plateau space, what if we do shift our perspective and decide that we have chosen it? It shifts our thinking from saying, "I don't want to be here," or "I'm stuck," into a moment that gives us some power and some choice. Which brings us to what we can do to make that period, now that we've accepted it, into a life-giving experience. Because once we accept the space, we need to accept the journey. That calls us to reconnect with ourselves on a soul level, because it's within our soul where our truth resides. And that's where connection and creativity and love can show us how to express the truth that we find. We're also called to trust the outcome of wherever our truth leads us. One of the most powerful mantras that I've picked up over the past 10 years comes from cultural anthropologist Angelise Arian and her book, The Fourfold Way, Walking the Paths of the Warrior, Teacher, Healer, and Visionary. It comes from her fourth way, which is based on the archetype of teacher. I am open to outcome, not attached to outcome. And I've said that, I'm open to outcome, not attached. My clients are probably sick of me sharing that particular mantra. But part of what makes liminal time and the journey so uncomfortable is that we are attached to the way things were, and we resist acknowledging that and then letting them go. It's important to realize that in the releasing, we are making space for a new reality. And instead of jumping to judgment and assuming that that space is going to be scary, what if we shift to curiosity and wonder what's going to take its place? We also become attached to the future being a certain way. And this came up this morning, needing to make the right decision or going through the right door. We're afraid we're going to make a wrong choice. But what's wrong with going through the wrong door? Maybe going through that door gives us information we didn't have before. It tells us more about what we want, or maybe what we definitely don't want. And what if we remember that we can always choose to exit that room and go back into the hallway and choose another door? We always have that choice. And if we remain open to outcome, not attached, it's a little bit easier to make. The best you can do is choose the door that seems right in the moment, and then release your expectations and release attachment to it being the right door. It helps in all of this if you have a beginner's mind. If all the old rituals are falling away, it gives you an opportunity to unlearn the way that you have been seeing yourself and the world. Instead of filling up yourself with opinions and ideas and thoughts of other people, it's a chance to empty yourself. Take on the mind of a student, one who is curious and open to new experiences. And notice when your ego is causing you trouble by saying, "This isn't how it's supposed to be," or "You know better than this. What are you doing here? What's wrong with you?" You tell your ego to take a back seat and to be quiet and just listen for a change. There's another thing to be mindful of with you want the liminal space to be healing and to reframe it. Notice how much you're looking out there for answers. Notice if you're spending a lot of time listening to the gurus who tell you that they have all the keys to success, or they have a simple 5-step process that can help you get your groove back. It's tempting to look for those kinds of shortcuts and to dive into the pool and swim around in other people's journeys. and to believe that they have some sort of secret sauce, that if you knew all those ingredients, everything would be okay. Instead, we can use that plateau to quiet those other voices, to be fully present to our own journey, and to discover the secret ingredients for our secret sauce. In saying that, I'm not saying that we shouldn't listen to other people, especially our elders and those whose wisdom resonates with us. For me, I think of Anne Lamott, Parker Palmer, Elizabeth Gilbert, other people whose transparency and vulnerability have inspired me during liminal times. It's often healing, of course, to find resonance in other people's stories. Just don't allow their voices to dictate or drown out your own voice or your own story, or to distract you from being quiet with your own thoughts and feelings. To aid in that reflection, use the opportunity to ask yourself, again in the words of Michael Meade, why am I alive right now? Why are you and your particular set of gifts, your genius, alive here on this earth, in this place, with these people, in this moment? It's a chance on that plateau to listen really closely to what your mind and your heart and your soul is telling you about your purpose. I found myself pondering my purpose and questioning it pretty heavily in the days around the election. I remember sitting on the living room floor and thinking, what am I doing? I felt completely lost. And like the work I was doing, while it was satisfying and important, and I chose it 100%, somehow it wasn't enough. It wasn't entirely aligned with my soul and why I believed I was alive at this particular moment in history. It's only by sitting on the plateau that I've started to find some clarity about my purpose. And honestly, I'm still on a journey of discernment. In some ways, I still feel like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Why am I here? But I am closer than I was. And that's because I've paid attention not only to what my gifts are, but why they are present and how they can be of service in this particular time, in this particular place. And how we spend our plateau is going to be different for every single person in this room. One thing I know for sure, we can't rush through it, nor can we bury it in technology. We have to experience it rather than masking it or putting it through Facebook and Instagram filters to make it all pretty and presentable. I invite, as you're in that space, to put away that technology and those distractions, to spend time in nature, in other places. Go to the hammock, those places that nourish you. Journal with pen and paper. Draw, make art, color, make music, dance. Take a break from social media and definitely go on a news fast. Notice if you're finding escape in different things like alcohol or food or shopping, any of these things that are meant to sort of distract or numb you from being in that uncomfortable space. Your liminal space experiences are going to be more creative, and you'll increase your resilience even more. You'll notice your resilience more if you're fully present for them. And that brings us to one of the real lessons of that liminal time, and that's patience. That's why we heard from Mary Oliver in her simple invitation to remember that things take the time they take. Don't worry. It's about a willingness to wait without feeling like we have to be in control or constantly doing something. We're challenged to trust the unfolding, to trust the process. And here's a quick story about how challenging patience during uncertainty can be. A few weeks ago, I found myself at the urgent care on a Sunday afternoon. Andy went with me, and I had made sure I was prepared in case there was a long wait. So I had my phone, I had my iPad, I had other various toys in my purse. And we got there, and instead of waiting, we were called pretty quickly. So I got to go in, and it kind of surprised me. So they called my name, and I just jumped up and went, and I left my purse and all of my toys behind. So I went to the exam room. The doctor saw me. She determined she wanted to take some x-rays, so we went and did that. She brought me back to the exam room, and she said, it'll be about 20 minutes before the x-rays are ready. And so, wait here, and then we'll be back with you with our next steps. I'm like, uh-oh, I'm sitting here in this empty room with none of my distractions, with nothing but me and my brain. There was like no magazines. There was a vaccination poster on the wall that took me about 2 minutes to read, and then I was done. I mean, do you remember, like, as a kid, it's like you'd read anything, like the cereal box, whatever. So I was desperate. And it didn't take very long. It's probably only about a minute before my mind went to a study that I suddenly understood a little bit better. And this took place a few years ago, where it highlights the challenge of being left alone with our own thoughts. In one iteration of the study, participants were to be left in an empty room with no pen, no paper, no phone, nothing, like them and maybe in a chair. And they knew they would be in there anywhere from 6 to 15 minutes with nothing but their imagination to keep them entertained. But there was one option to break up their boredom. Each participant was wired up to a device that would deliver a shock if they pressed a button. Think about that. They had the chance to feel the shock before they went into the room, just to feel the intensity of it. It turns out that 25% of women and 66% of men, no judgment here, shocked themselves at least once during their time in the room. And get this, one outlier shocked himself 190 times in 15 minutes. And because I know you're wondering, I've already done the math. That's basically one shock every 4.7 seconds. I share this shocking story as partial evidence that shows how being in a new situation without our familiar comforts and rituals, while challenging ourselves to go inward, while being patient with the process, is really hard. If it were easy, we would never get stuck. We would always just be able to go with the flow. And it's easy for me to stand up here and say, empty yourself, let go of attachments, be open, trust the process. It's easy to talk about it. And I suspect if I spoke with any of you, you'd say, yeah, I know this on an intellectual level. It's the emotional level that is really the challenge. And so that bottom line is that we have to be patient and compassionate with ourselves. We need to ask for support from people who love us. And when we find ourselves in that liminal time and space, to see it as an opportunity to rest from all of the striving that we've done before we move on to the next thing. We're dared to embrace breathing, patience, waiting, listening, anticipation without attachment or expectation, introspection without judgment. We're also called to have a sense of humor about it. And in the words of Emily Dickinson, we're called to dwell in possibility. The final invitation I'll offer to you is to create your own ritual for the liminal time. Because as we heard, the liminal time is post, ritual we're familiar with and pre-ritual yet to come. So we talked again, like how we always want to orient ourselves. So I want to offer you this. When you feel like the ground has shifted beneath your feet and you've lost touch with Terra, take that as a sign that your new Terra can be gratitude. And here's one of my personal meditations on gratitude. I'm grateful for the lessons of the past, for the gifts of the present, and the mysteries of the future. In whatever way feels most meaningful to you, express gratitude for your journey so far, where you've been, what you've done, who you've met. Express gratitude for whatever's happening in the present moment, for your chance to catch your breath and to reflect and listen. And express gratitude for what is to come, both the gifts and the challenges, and the ways in which your heart and mind are inevitably going to expand. At the start of this talk, I took us back in time to November 2016, and I shared how going through those first stages of grief took me to a liminal space. I left us off at depression, reflection, and loneliness. I believe we're starting to leave the liminal space and move towards the sixth stage, reconstruction and working through. We are recalibrating ourselves. We're creating new rituals and solutions. We're rediscovering our voice and our power. And we're forging new identities that possibly would not have existed had we not been through the trauma and then sat in that liminal space to reckon with them. While I still think it might be a while before we manifest that final stage, acceptance and hope, we know the potential and the promise of it. And until then, I want to leave you with a verse from John O'Donohue's book, To Bless the Space Between Us, and it's called For the Interim Time. Near the end of day, life has drained out of light, and it is too soon for the mind of night to have darkened things. No place looks like itself. Loss of outline makes everything look strangely in between, unsure of what has been or what might come. In this wan light, even trees seem groundless. In a while it will be night, but nothing here seems to believe the relief of darkness. You are in this time of the interim, where everything seems withheld. The path you took to get here has washed out. The way forward is still concealed from you. The old is not old enough to have died away. The new is still too young to be born. You cannot lay claim to anything. In this place of dusk, your eyes are blurred, and there is no mirror. Everyone has lost sight of your heart, and you can see nowhere to put your trust. You know you have to make your own way through. As far as you can, hold your confidence. Do not allow confusion to squander this call, which is loosening your roots in false ground, that you might come free from all that you have outgrown. What is being transfigured here is your mind, and it is difficult and slow to become new. The more faithfully you can endure here, the more refined your heart will become for your arrival in the new dawn. May we all experience a sense of passionate gratitude for wherever we are in our journey, and especially for those interim times when we're in the beautiful not yet. Thank you.